morning, everybody, and welcome to our full council today, Tuesday the 24th of January. I'd like to start with declarations of interest. Do we have any, please? No, thank you. The minutes of our previous meeting you have in front of you. Are there any comments, please, around those minutes? No, then could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Mumford, Councillor Watt, all those in favour of adopting the minutes? Thank you very much. Carried. Item 3, Chairman's announcements. I have none. Item 4, Questions under Standing Order 14. I have none. Item 5 is consider reports from committees, including minutes or draft minutes for information. Today we are receiving the draft minutes of the Scrutiny Committee from the 8th of December 2022, where the committee, amongst other items for that day, received a report on the Isles of Scilly Sea Links project led by this council. As we start this new year, I wanted to make a brief statement from the Chair on the current position of the Isles of Scilly Sea Links project and, importantly, the work that we are doing with the government to ensure the project is delivered and the levelling up objectives are met. At full council in September last year, members approved a programme of further work to address the issues raised by the Minister for Aviation, Maritime and Security. The completion of this further work would then allow both you, the members, and the government ministers to make informed decisions on how the project should be delivered. I'm pleased to report that both council officers and our officials within government are making progress, and that the award of project development funding to the council just before Christmas will allow the outstanding work to be completed by March 2023 at the latest. This will then allow members and ministers to consider the information and make informed decisions. Members will be aware that the project partners have put forward their own proposals to the Department of Transport for delivering this project. I have written to the Minister for Aviation, Maritime and Security, Baroness Fear, to request that these proposals be considered alongside the other options being developed to deliver the project. And that letter to Baroness Fear is incorporated in part 2 of our documents. I can appreciate that everyone would like the council and the government to complete this stage of the project as quickly as possible. However, I would remind members that the decisions we as a council will be required to take will have an impact on Scilly for the next 30 years, which comes with a tremendous responsibility for all those who have a role in delivering it. This is not a quick fix to address the ageing vessels and improve our harbour infrastructure, but a once-in-a-generation opportunity to provide an affordable, fit-for-purpose service for our community and visitors, passenger travel and for our freight on this lifeline route that is sustainable and provides a healthy future for these islands and our community. I'd like to hand over to Scrutiny Committee Chair Avril if you would like to make any comments. Councillor Mumford.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no comments to make. I don't know if anybody else has any comments. People can't ask questions, but they can comment on the minutes.
Councillor Legg.
Thank you. I'd obviously, sorry, I just find my place. Until we hear from the government regarding the views, it's impossible to make any kind of decisions, and of course I'll be going into any meeting with an open mind. However, I'd be extremely disappointed if any changes were made to the agreed outcomes of the Levelling Up funding bid, especially in relation to the ambitions regarding carbon reduction. The original bid made it clear that in order to meet the government's Clean Maritime Plan, the project would deliver energy-efficient vessels with zero-emission propulsion capability and reduced fuel consumption. This also ties in with the island's own destination management plan strategy for environmentally sustainable tourism. I thank the Chair and the Chair of Scrutiny for the opportunity to comment on these minutes.
Thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Sims?
Yes, I think hopefully we're all aware of the content of the last scrutiny committee. Essentially, it was the Steamship Company and Partners putting a 49%, 51% deal on the table to the government, and I think from their perspective it makes perfect sense. I think the Steamship Company have got to protect their own interests, and I think my concern and certainly Harry just laid out the green concerns there is the extent which it will deliver the original Levelling Up criteria, and hopefully when the DfT government come back with decision one way or the other, we can actually hammer this out and hopefully enhance the Levelling Up, which I think is possibly a friend of the 4951, but it all remains to be seen, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other hands up, so we will move on now to item 6 on our agenda, which is to consider motions in accordance with Standing Order 12. I have none. Item 7 on our agenda is urgent items. I have none. Into part 1, item 8 on our agenda is the first of our planning applications for 2 Enna Close in the hands of our Chief Planning Officer, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this application is brought to members as the applicant is a close family relative of a senior officer of this council. The proposal results in the removal of a large rear conservatory and its replacement with a single-storey rear extension. To the front, an extension is proposed to the existing porch to provide a home office. The assessment, as you'll note in the report, has considered the design and scale of the proposed extensions and both considered acceptable in terms of the character of the existing property, the wider street scene and neighbouring amenity. Subject to the conditions set out in the report, the application is recommended for approval.
Councillor Marcus, please.
Yeah, I can't see anything here to use the recommendation. So therefore, I propose it for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. Seconding. Thank you. No other comments? Okay, so all those in favour, please. It's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to item 9 on our agenda, a land to the north of Dawnview, Briar. Also in your hands, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is brought to members of the applicant is married to a serving councillor of the council. This is an application for the change of use of a small agricultural field for the purposes of siting a small pod structure for residential occupation. The structure would be connected to the water supply and the existing septic tank, which would be for the purposes of seasonal staff accommodation and would be used in combination with the permanent staff accommodation at the Island Fish premises as approved in December 2021. The scale and design have been assessed as acceptable and the site would be relatively well screened and the structure would not be visually harmful in the wider landscape or the amenity of neighbouring properties. The site is more related to the activities of the business and no wider harmful impacts have been identified. Subject to the conditions set out in the report, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
So, yeah, I can't really see any issues with such. I just want to clear a couple of things in my head and for the minutes. What existing missions have they got for staff accommodation?
So in 2021, there was an application approved by members for an extension for a 2-bed extension to the Island Fish premises. That is under construction at the moment, or certainly not yet complete. They also have a pod approved a year ago, I think that's March, which is for temporary seasonal staff use, after which it would be retained at the site for seasonal holiday let use as part of a diversification of island fish. And this would be a second pod, which is purely for seasonal staff accommodation.
This second pod is petitioned for, like say, for staff accommodation only.
Yeah.
If they want to change that, they'd have to come back for.
Yes. The recommended conditions would be for seasonal staff use in connection with island fish.
Okay, and that seasonal staff could be for other businesses as well.
Well, we have widened that condition to be on other off-islands at the request of the applicant, where we've allowed a business staff use to be widened to any business on that off-island. So that could be widened to allow the applicants to have it for their own staff, but if they no longer needed it for their own staff, could potentially let it out to other businesses.
Okay.
On Friar.
Well, I think we'll deal with. There's no point in second guessing any future. I'll approve the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sims?
I'm happy to second the recommendation as well. I just wanted to ask, what does semi-permanent mean, really? Is it like half temporary?
So you could use it. You could use it. So you could move it. It's not fixed to the ground. So
You can pick it up and take it somewhere else.
Yes.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Councillor Marcus?
Sorry. I'm just aware we've had quite a lot of shepherd's huts come to council. Is there a way of measuring their impact or measuring how common they are? I mean, the proliferation of them could be an issue in the future.
Yeah.
Is what I'm going.
So, it's part of the annual monitoring is to understand the effectiveness of the policies of the local plan. So if we feel that currently policies in the local plan don't say there's a limit as to how many semi-permanent pod type structures we can have, it's going to come down to an assessment of visual impact. Are they starting to be so prolific that they're harming the landscape? And monitoring the policies, if we felt it was necessary, we could amend the policies that said, actually, we want to put a limit per island or limit on the islands generally, but it generally comes down to landscape harm, neighbouring impact, and infrastructure provision. If one of those is a problem, then it's reasonable to refuse an application for more pods at the moment.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Legg, please.
You mentioned that it would be connecting into existing septic tank and the soakaway. Is the capacity of that noted?
I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I believe that the applicants have said that there is provision and they have to put their sewer somewhere. They can't just let the sewer flow out into the sea. So that would be an issue if that was the result of this permission. I don't know what the capacity is of the current septic tank.
No, but it is within the capacity.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a proposer and a seconder for the approval of this application. All those in favour, please. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 10 is the planning application for Stone Yard, Morwell Lane. Again, in your hands, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is brought to members as the council have a land interest in the application site. The proposal is to use the former Stone Yard to site temporary contractor accommodation in connection with the delivery of the coastal defensive work on the islands. The accommodation will provide a centralised area for the contractor staff to stay on the islands without interfering with tourism accommodation. The land is well screened and flat, and the siting of the accommodation units will not have a wider harmful impact in the long term on the character of the conservation area or impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. Vehicular access to the site is limited to when the waste site is open, but emergency services can access the area if required once the waste site is closed. Pedestrian access is provided through the installation of a temporary bridge over the leap to the northwest of the site, which will provide access to the industrial estate. The units and all the installations associated with the temporary use of the land would be removed once the project is complete or within 2 years. It's worth highlighting that there's an outstanding objection from the Environment Agency on the basis of the originally submitted flood risk assessment. Both national and local policies require development to avoid areas at risk of flooding where there is no alternative. Then it's essential that the use or any activity is safe over its lifetime and does not present or cause a flood risk elsewhere as a result. The applicant has amended the flood risk assessment and we have reconsulted the Environment Agency, and I can now confirm that the Environment Agency have lifted their objection subject to the proposal to the applicant carrying out the operations at the site in accordance with the recommendations of the flood risk assessment. I would therefore recommend an additional condition to this effect. In light of the acute housing crisis and the shortage of staff accommodation on the islands, together with the temporary nature, the proposed contractor accommodation as part of delivering the coastal defences is considered acceptable. For the reasons set out in the report, subject to the conditions listed in Appendix A, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
We talked about they've got a solar panel on site, a solar array. I was wondering if there's enough capacity in that solar array to power the showers if they're all used at once when people...
So they do have a proposed solar bank, which is their main source of power for the site. In addition, they have a backup generator, which is a diesel generator on the site, which would only be used once there's no solar power, the power of the pods.
Can we make sure that generator is as quiet as it can be?
Yeah.
Because it will sit in a valley and it will resonate. If that's
Any statutory nuisance is controllable through our environmental health as well. That would kick in if it was causing a statutory nuisance.
I'd rather it was done before rather than afterwards.
Yeah, check that.
Yep. Have that condition in there. Everything else, as far as I can see, is okay. Then I'll open it up to the floor.
Councillor Bedford, please.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying the issue about the Environmental Agency, because it was of concern. My concern is the highway safety and the traffic management. You know, I go down there regularly to do shopping or whatever, and it's bonkers down there. It's chaotic, and I think given pedestrian access between, I think it's Richard Hands and Five Islands Trading, that is one of the pinch points down there of traffic management, because you've also got the fire station and the ambulance control. So I am actually a bit worried about that and that access and how that impacts on the highway safety and whether we need an assessment of the traffic management down there. My also concern is, I think about 18 months ago we had a number of businesses come to the council talking about whether the industrial estate could be used for staff accommodation. And I can remember your word, Lisa, every little community needs its dirty little corner and not really suitable for any residential accommodation. And we're actually saying here that we can have a temporary use of this accommodation. Staff accommodation is also temporary. It's only for 6 months of the year or 7 months. So I wonder what sort of message we're giving if we're saying on one hand we don't want people to really live down the industrial site if possible, because it is a bit industrial, it's not really suitable, and then on this hand we're saying actually it's okay to build some pods down there for some workers. So I just have a bit of conflict there in my head.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick, please.
Well, I would say, I think, is that this, so far as I understand, perhaps Lisa could clarify, this is not actually part of the designated industrial estate. And secondly, I would say, although I hope people don't take this in the wrong way, that if you're working for a construction project, you probably have to accept the kind of accommodation which is comfortable, clean and adequate, but not exactly luxurious. So in a way, we're looking for different criteria. I hope that's helpful and not considered negative.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to come back on this?
So to Councillor Bedford's point, I do think living on an industrial estate has the effect of constraining industrial activities, and I still maintain that does lie outside the boundary of the industrial estate. It is kind of in between Morwell, the Wayside, and the industrial estate, even though there's a triple SI running out behind that. I do think it's easier to accept a contractor's temporary use on this site than I think it is to accept permanent residential within the confines of the industrial estate. I think there is a difference.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a proposer and a seconder to delegate this to our planning officer for determination, please? Councillor Dean.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose the recommendation.
I can just say I don't need it to be delegated to me. You can make this decision here today. It was only pending the Environment Agency's consultation response, so it is slight change to that recommendation, if that's okay.
Yes.
It is quite ironic that the work that they're doing is, to protect us from flooding. And anyway, but yeah, I'm happy to propose the recommendation.
Seconder, please. Councillor Legg. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 11 on our agenda is the land at Porth Cressa in your hands as well. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is brought to members as a proposal for 2 dwellings default to full council in accordance with the planning protocol. The proposal is to construct 2 detached, traditionally designed local need homes that will be subject to Section 106 legal agreements. Each house is a modest 2-bedroom home with a small garden area and pedestrian access only. Materials of construction are identified as granite, timber cladding, slate roofs, timber windows and doors. Each house will have a small timber external storage shed. Although originally submitted in June 2021, the applicant has agreed an extension of time in order to carry out further assessments and submit a number of missing reports to support the proposal. Members carried out a site visit in August 2021. In March 2022, a full flood risk assessment and a drainage strategy was submitted. In May 2022, a heritage impact assessment was submitted, and in July, a preliminary ecological assessment of the site was submitted together with a landscape view of the site, with the proposed dwelling shown in the wider landscape context. All neighbouring properties and previous objectives have been reconsulted on the additional information. The proposed plans have also been amended to show the raised ground level and with the overall height to ensure that this doesn't result in an excessively prominent form of development. Officers are aware that the site falls just outside the defined settlement boundary of Hewtown, but the report has considered the footpath width gap between the site and has concluded that the site is well related to the built-up settlement of Hewtown, and the proposed development would not result in an isolated form of development. Although the development of this site so close to the coastline will undoubtedly be a highly visible form of development, it would generally be consistent with development of the Porth Cressa area. The design is considered traditional, and the scale proposed would be in accordance with the policy requirements to seek to ensure that all new housing achieves a balanced housing stock. As a form of development that will be clearly apparent, it is critical that it does not give rise to harm to the wider landscape character of the AONB or the character of the conservation area. I have concluded that traditional design scale have sought to minimise visual harm and will be constructed of a palette of materials that is in keeping with the traditional vernacular of the island. The applicant has commissioned and submitted a flood risk assessment which establishes a minimum finished floor level to avoid future flood risks associated with the 1 in 200 year flooding event. The requirements of this will have the effect of raising the existing ground levels of both plots by just over 1 metre. Appropriate and effective boundary landscaping will therefore be an important aspect of a development to minimise this effect. I would also recommend that the same flood risk management plan condition to ensure appropriate conditions are in place in the event of a flood situation. Overall and on balance, in light of the additional weight attached to the issue of the local housing need, the traditional design and sustainable location, I've found that the proposal is acceptable. A number of conditions are recommended to ensure that the benefits of the proposal are realised, its visual impact is minimised as much as possible, particularly landscaping. And subject to these, it is recommended that members be minded to approve the application, bearing in mind that the final decision will not be issued until the completion of the Section 106 legal agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Where do I start? Right. First, it's worth acknowledging the massive public interest in this application. So I'd like to thank all the members of the public for writing in and giving us their views. Really helpful. I know it's been a long process. I kind of agree with most of the report. I agree with the issues around the boundaries, biodiversity impacts, and the impact on historic environments. One thing I wanted to clear up was wastewater. Lisa, can you explain the consultation response from South West Water and water?
Yes. So South West Water haven't objected on the basis of capacity. They have flagged there is a capacity issue with the public sewer network in Kew Town. So any permission that we grant doesn't give them permission to connect to the sewer. They still have to get that agreement with South West Water.
Okay, so they can't have septic tanks?
They could. I don't know where they would put septic tanks. The site is quite small, so they could come back and put septic tanks in, but I don't think it's a particularly easy site to get those.
And what about surface water runoff?
Surface water is in their drainage strategy and is proposed to be filtered out towards the sea. There's filtrations to make sure they're not polluting it with any surface water.
Okay, so these things add to the affordability of the project site, which is I don't know if it's a main planning consideration, but it definitely is a consideration for me. The thing I can't really get over is the prominence of the design, the landscape, the mass and the form of the building, in that if you're on the path, the top of the wall, retaining wall, the second property is going to be 1.5 meters high. Is that assertion about right?
About 1 metre above the
current floor level?
Floor level, yes, just over 1 metre. They'll have to raise the plot of each property. Yeah.
Okay, and then the house itself is only a couple of metres back from the wall, so it's quite a large.
Yes.
6 metre high.
The north plot is pulled quite far back. On its plot, the south plot is further forward, but there is a boundary, then a path, then the house.
Yes, this is quite close to the heart. It could be quite imposing when you're on the ground. Okay, that's my questions done for the moment. I'll throw it open to everyone else.
Thank you. Councillor Dean, please.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the applicant for the full report and all the number of assessments that have been done. It seems to me that the flood risk assessment's been done, the ecological impact survey's been done, the heritage impact assessment's been done. So the only kind of difficult area for this application is the visual impact, and for me, obviously there's going to be a visual impact. It's in a fairly prominent site, but you have to balance that up with the needs of the islands. Now, we don't have to go into the whole issues of housing here and now. We all know what they are. And these are two modest buildings, 2-bedroom houses, and they're happy to enter into a 106 agreement. So it's a win as far as housing goes on the island, at no risk, no financial risk to the council. It's something we can just say yes, and off they go and build them. So I think we have to bear that in mind. offensive to some people. What I would like to see, and something briefly talked about before, is some green boundaries, and maybe put that as a condition on the application, so that rather than a block wall or a granite wall, even, that there is, there's a green hedge around all of the site, to kind of soften the impact. One other point, or two other points maybe. One, there clearly were buildings on the site before, so you could argue that this is a brownfield site, so that kind of sways me towards accepting the proposal. And the other, just a brief point I'd like to make, is that I don't think the photograph that they submitted as part of the application does the application any justice, because the granite in that is the shiniest, whitest granite I've ever seen in my life, and I think in reality they would blend better into the hillsides. But I have to say, on balance, I think the pros outweigh the cons, so I will propose the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watt, please. Thank you, Chairman. 3 points I've got to make about this. Firstly, I'm not comfortable with this application at all. I'd like to raise a flag of an idea I've recently discovered called community-centred conservation. I know it's not a designated planning phrase, but nevertheless, and one of the 13 objectives refers eloquently, in my mind, to the degradation of the environment and heritage, and labels this proposed development as, and I quote, intrusive and destructive of the natural environment. And it's hard not to disagree with that. Secondly, I'd like to ask the question, when is a boundary not a boundary? And to me, this is a classic example of urban creep, and definitely conflicts with the protection of the quality of the rural landscape. And thirdly, and finally, it's also very prominent, something which Councillor Dean mentioned briefly just now, very close to the shoreline and inside the Aldersley Conservation Area, which is a designated heritage asset. And where, and I quote from paragraph 42 in the report, and I quote now, there is a statutory duty to ensure development is of sufficient quality to either preserve or enhance the character of the area. And in my view, this proposition does neither. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Councillor Mumford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few points to make. My first point is that the application is outside the boundary settlement. Second, the site is a conservation area and there is a requirement to ensure any development preserves or enhances the appearance of the area, which in my opinion this does not. Rising sea levels and coastal erosion is prominent in my mind. Look at what's happened to the path going out to Benillis in the last 60 years or so. The path has eroded away. There is no landscape visual impact assessment, another important point. Has there been a heritage impact assessment? It is referred to in the report, but I've been looking for the actual assessment and I just wondered whether there had been. Protected species, has that been looked into? Bat survey. We must take into consideration the comments from the public, otherwise why do we have them? Finally, as a councillor, I feel I cannot bend the rules of the boundary settlement to suit our housing needs, although our housing needs are great. And I'd like to recommend for refusal on the grounds of it's outside the boundary settlement and it's a conservation area and it does not preserve and enhance the area. It's going to be massive prominence and an imposing on North Crescent. I'd like if Lisa could answer my question about the heritage impact assessment.
Yes, so there is heritage impact assessment. They did have that done and that was submitted in March, I think, last year. That was subject to reconsultation, and archaeological advisors did comment on that, provided a response. There is no landscape visual impact assessment, but they did do, Councillor Dean pointed out, a landscape view to show the context of the surrounding development. And they did do a protected species assessment of the site. They did a phase 1 habitat survey, so they've assessed whether or not there are any protected species known to be at the site, and they also did a walkover, and there are some conditions that they would have to follow, to comply with if they were to get permission for this, which is to carefully remove hedges and trees and plants to ensure that they don't have a negative impact on any protected species that could be there, like nesting birds.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Grottick, please.
Thank you, Chair. My words will echo the comments from several of my colleagues. As we all know, we have several designations on our protected landscape. The area of outstanding natural beauty, we're in a conservation area, and there are archaeological constraint considerations. However, all of these have an overriding premise. All sites within conservation's proposed developments must preserve or enhance the wider character of the area. I would agree with Councillor Montford and several other colleagues that this does not. I would remind colleagues that we have a statutory duty to have regard to conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area of outstanding natural beauty, and only in exceptional circumstances can we deviate from this requirement. The report recognises that there are some disadvantages that simply cannot be overcome. And I would just say that for me, I regard my duty as a custodian of our heritage landscape to protect our heritage landscape, except in exceptional circumstances, to pass it on to the next generation, is my overriding concern, and while I cannot support this proposition. There is also the question, as colleagues have mentioned, of coastal erosion and flood defence concerns. While not within the designated area, this is very, very close. Sewage arrangements will add to the cost, and which makes the financial modelling very insecure. And parking is a real issue in that area should the inhabitants of these proposed houses have vehicles. My second comment is about biodiversity. This is a very small but important piece of land, home to a diverse mix of butterflies, nesting birds and small mammals. I have been fortunate to see a silly shrew very close to this particular area. So, for all of those reasons, for me, I cannot support this application. And I would imagine we will take the recommendations in order that they were tabled. But should Councillor Montford's proposal to refuse come to the table, I would be happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you. I take Councillor Dean's point about housing, desperate issues here, but this proposal is outside the defined settlement boundary, which is what's the point of having a settlement boundary if we're going to, go outside it. And the landscape and visual impact assessment, I think, is really important. It's a nationally accepted methodology, to actually understand the value of the resource that we have there. And I really think this will have an adverse impact on the character of the landscape. And I take on what Councillor Watt said very interesting points, and I cannot support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Sims, please.
Thank you. I think it's a good report, and I sort of run with much of it. And my principal issue is not because it's outside of the boundary, etc. I think I could accept that in somewhere else. It's because it's actually there. It's right at the end of maybe not the nicest beach on the islands, but certainly the premier beach on the islands. We've got 13 objections over 10 pages of closely typed font. I object to it essentially because it spoils shares a very iconic view on the islands. I mean, I think a lot of visitors would find it quite objectionable as well. And I realise we have a housing crisis, but I don't think that means that we should build irrespective of that. So I very strongly support the recommendation to reject the application.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, for me, I think it's almost unfortunate this is one application for two separate properties. One of them sits far more comfortably with me than the other. If it was two applications, I would have no great issue with the house closest to the U-turn end, but the house closer to Penniness is slightly unsettling. But the housing crisis and the housing pressures we find ourselves in lead me to a position where I probably would see that as being overriding my vote.
Thank you. Director Nicola, please.
Yes, members, just to guide you a little bit, if you are going for a recommendation for refusal, sometimes less is more. So just looking at the reasons that have been put forward onto the table around the outside the settlement criteria. If you look at page 65 of the agenda pack, the principal development, there's a really good rationale there as to say why our policies would allow something outside of the settlement boundary. So I think I would focus members' attention on those landscape and conservation area character implications rather than the principle of settlement, because if you're going to appeal, we'll have to support those reasons for refusal. And I think the rationale that's set out on page 65 explains that we have an alternative policy, which is LC7 on windfall sites, that would support the principle of development adjacent to the existing settlement. So just to guide you in your thinking around any reasons for refusal.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments, please? Councillor Sim,
Just we mentioned the possibility of appeal. Now, if we do reject it and it goes to appeal, I mean, the issue I would have is that the people in the mainland who are looking at it have got no idea of, if you like, the resonance of that particular area over here. And it is a very iconic view. It's hundreds of thousands of people on Port Cressida, and I just wanted to make the point that if it does go to appeal, that the local impact for lots of people over here would be disproportionate to what people looking at the outside might well think.
Thank you. Councillor Dean, please.
I'd just reiterate the point I made earlier, that I think the only grounds for refusal in my mind would be the visual impact of these buildings. Now, this comes down to a very subjective view, and in my view, I think if there was greenery around it and the granite is darker than shown in the picture, my personal view, and I know other people are going to disagree, but my personal view is that I don't think it would be bad. And I think after a couple of years of them being there, I think it would just blend into the landscape. But that's just my view, and I accept that other people have other views. But the other final point I'll make, and then I'll shut up, is as Lead Member for Housing, I'm probably more aware than most of the pressures that we've got. And for that reason, in all good conscience, I couldn't refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Grottig.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would like it noted that my objection certainly, and other colleagues as well, have noted that this site is within a conservation area, and proposed developments must preserve or enhance the wider character of the area, which, in my opinion, this particular project does not. And also that we have noted the biodiversity issue with regard to that particular site and the concerns around biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just come back to Councillor Grottig about that. So the opinion of whether it enhances the scenery is a personal view. That's the point I was making before. That in my view, I think it doesn't impact adversely on the thing. So that becomes a personal view.
Thank you, Councillor Grottig.
all I would say to my colleagues are that we have a statutory duty to have regard to conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area of outstanding natural beauty, and only in exceptional circumstances are we allowed to deviate from that. I agree that to some degree, whether or not this project would enhance the conservation area is of course subjective, but my argument is that it would not. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford, did you want to come in? No. Thank you. So we have a proposal to refuse this application from Councillor Mumford. Oh, sorry. I thought we were taking. Yeah. Okay. We have a proposal to accept and pass the application. Councillor Dean proposed. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Dean, please?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Dorian Smith. All those in favour of passing this for approval? That's 4. We have a, that's not, sorry? Yes. Sorry. We have a second proposal again. Okay, well, apologies. So those councillors against, thank you. 7. So, yeah. So this fails and the application is not approved. Thank you. Sorry? Okay, excuse me, members, before we move on, we just need from Councillor Mumford, please, the reasons for refusal.
The reason for, I think the main reason for the refusal is the conservation area. It does not preserve and enhance the area. I think Councillor Grottick may have put it a little bit better than me. Perhaps she would like to add to that.
No, I think as stated, as noted, the site is within a conservation area and proposed developments must preserve or enhance the wider character of the area. And councillors have got minded to their statutory duties to have regard to that. And I believe we also mentioned the loss of biodiversity concerns around the existing site as a secondary recommendation for refusal. Can I ask Councillor Marcus if he's comfortable with that?
Yeah, I am popular with biodiversity because there's a biodiversity report already which highlights the lack of and not importance of biodiversity on sites. But apart from that, I think that's fine.
Okay. Right. So we need to vote on that wording now. So could I have a proposer for that wording? It's Councillor Mumford. Seconder, Councillor Grottick. Those in favour? That's passed. Thank you very much. Apologies for the technicalities and the incompetence of the chair. Right, we move on now to, thank you Lisa for your work on this. We move on to item 12, which is the third quarter financial performance report in the hands of our 151 officer, Russell Ashman. Thank you, Russell.
Yes, good morning everyone. Thank you, Chair. And today I'm bringing to you the third quarter financial performance report. You'll note today on page 105 there are a number of additional recommendations which relate back to the 21-22 statement of accounts, and we are now in a position to reapprove those, but I'll get to that later in the report, and I will ask Grant Thornton, David Bray from Grant Thornton, probably to come in and give his comments on the final audit finding report, but that will be towards the end of this report. So we move on to the revenue budget monitoring. On the next page, you will see at the end of the third quarter, our forecast for the year end is now an overspend of £135,000. This has moved quite significantly from the end of quarter two, where we were predicting a year-end position of a £13,000 overspend. Not a surprise, because I think both at that meeting and the previous Q1 report, I said that I would expect the position to worsen as we went through the year, as the impact of the global economic positions started feeding into the islands, i.e. the higher rate of inflation feeding into the cost of our services, the cost of the materials that we use, and that is what is happening in many ways. So it's not a surprise that is where we are. Bear in mind that we set the budget based on an inflation level of 3% for the pay award, 3.4% for materials. We now have a pay award which cost us 6%, and we know, and you will have all read in the press, that obviously inflation is over 10% at the moment. So I think 135,000 is not a particularly serious position, considering the pressures that we do have on the council and its cost base. And it would have been probably higher, our forecast, if it hadn't been for the fact that we have managed to receive an extra £116,000 worth of government grant that we hadn't planned for. That was welcome, so that's helped offset the overspend slightly. But as I said, we are overspending. Our plan is that we will have to fund that from the general reserve. The reserve can accommodate that. It's not always a great position to be reporting overspends, but as I say, it wasn't a surprise. The issue I have is that we are in a difficult economic times. What we do need to do, though, is get back spending within our annual resources. We can pick up an overspend for 1 year from reserves. We can potentially look at doing something in the budget for next year for 2, but we cannot continue using reserves. That is a rocky road that we don't want to go down. So accept that it's a difficult time, but we do have to bring spending back within resources in the medium term, and that will be addressed in our medium term financial plan, which we will bring in February to full council. There are a number of variances which are set out in section 2.2. I'm not going to take those as read, and in general, the one that I will pick up is the second one, B there, that we are now beginning to see pressure on the people and communities budget. It's an area that's been underspending for a year or so now, but as I've always said, this is due to the mix of residents in Park House, in terms of the numbers between self-funded and the ones that the council has to fund or part fund. That mix is beginning to change. It's been beneficial up until now, but it is beginning to change. That's putting pressure on the budget. And in addition, we know that we have struggled to recruit in both the adults and the children's space recently, and therefore we have to fall back in using agency staff, which are more expensive. Obviously, the plan is to wean ourselves off the agency staff as and when we can and as quickly as we can, but that is putting pressure, which means that we have now moved from having an underspend forecast at Q2 to a significant overspend. Probably the other point in dealing with activity around Park House is, again, inflation, beginning to see that come through in the provision of services, energy, food prices, etc. So, yes, we do need to keep a close eye on that. The position that we have enjoyed for the last 18 months is beginning to change there. Don't really want to comment on any more of those at the moment, Chair. Moving on to the airport. On the next level, you will see that in terms of our monitoring of the passenger numbers, it's all set out there in the table for you to read. We are slightly lower than we anticipated when we set the budget. We set the budget based on getting 88,000 passengers. At the moment, we're about 2,000 behind that forecast, which does feed into a shortfall of income and pressure on that budget, which we will need to address if that is going to be a ongoing reduction in numbers. We'll have to build in that pressure in the budget for next year, or increase fees and charges accordingly. At the moment, we are behind the number of passengers and the activity we anticipated. Moving on, you'll just see the graph showing the switch in the year. As I said, Q1 we've moved from having significant underspend to having a fairly significant overspend. Again, we knew that was coming. We knew inflation would feed into our cost at some point. You'll see the capital programme is in the next part set out on page 109. There have been a few amendments due to grants, which we've now added into the programme, and the recommendation there at the beginning of the report is that to uplift the capital programme accordingly. You'll also see that we have looked seriously at reprofiling the spend because we were expecting a very serious amount of spend in 22-23, which when you looked at the Q2 report, that was unlikely to be delivered. So it's now being rephased, although I would say at the moment it has moved from 22-23 into 23-24. We do need to be comfortable that 23-24 can deliver that level of expenditure. But there are some reasons why it could deliver that, and mainly because the Climate Adaptation City project, which is about 8 million, will spend significantly during that period next year. But you will see that with the revised forecast, we are now at about 66% spend today at the end of the quarter three. So we're well on target to hit the revised target of 3.7 million for the year. Major schemes, we set out the narrative there on most of the major schemes that we've got. We will be, however, adding the vessel section into this report from Q4 onwards. But you'll see there's narrative and tables around the Go EV electric vehicle project, which is now coming to an end. There is some small spend left to deliver in the capital front, some additional vehicles, but that will be winding up soon, as is the voucher scheme, which is now coming to an end. You'll see the figure set out there. There will be a small underspend, which means grants may not be spent and be not drawn down. And then we have the Climate Adaptation City, which has now had a slight revision to its profile spend on capital, moving a significant amount from the last quarter of 22-23 into 23-24. Not going to go through the details of the that individual project, but it's there, and I'm sure if you have any questions, the project team can answer those. Moving on, the forecast savings, there's no change there since the last report. All the forecast savings are still agreeing with delivering those, or we have mitigated any under delivery. Council tax collection performance, you will see there, it is still holding up. We are slightly, very, very slightly ahead of the target, only slightly, equivalent of about £4,000. But I think it's a good position to be in, considering the economic position, the cost of living crisis, that we are still keeping on target to deliver our council tax collection rate of 98.5%. And similarly, we've got good performance on business rates still. We're well on the way to delivering the majority of the business rates collection that we're in and based within our financial plans. A good point that is holding up. In terms of the water rate collection, you will see that small amounts are slowly coming in, but we've still got 40,000 left to collect. We have taken some legal action, which I'm not right up to speed where that is, but we have provided provision for having to write off that full amount if we have to. Every penny or pound we collect means that we can write back some of that provision to the benefit of the council. If we do have to write it all off, it won't have a detrimental impact on our bottom line,
But they say the more we collect, there will be a benefit the other way around. Housing rents, good performance still, way ahead of target. We've looked at this, we've mentioned it previously. A number of residents are overpaying slightly. They pay by standing order, not by direct debit. So standing orders are controlled by themselves. If they want that, there's not a lot we can do. We've pointed it out to them, but they continue to pay. So we have a few that will be in arrears, and we have a number that are in credit as well. It's an interesting position, but there's nothing we can do. If it's direct debit, we can change the amounts. If it's standing order, we cannot. Sundry debt position, again, good performance, although the balance overdue is just shy of £200,000, but that's within our target. We expect 10% to be outstanding at any one time. It's now only 5%, but it is a sum that we need to be careful of, although it has come down from 235,000 overdue at the end of Q2 to 196,000 at the end of Q3. So going in the right direction, and is not a figure of concern at the moment. It's just one that does still need to be carefully monitored as we move forward. Payment of invoices performance, slight pick-up on the SMEs in recent times, still lagging behind on payment tool suppliers and total SME. There is further work to be done. The finance team will be over on the island within the end of the month, and that's one of the areas we're going to try and talk through with some of the staff on the island to see whether we can pick up the trend on what is actually happening. Treasury management is set out there for you. I'm not going to go through it, but obviously we have updated the potential indicators that we have to report on a monthly basis for the latest capital programme. They're set out there. I'm not going to comment on them. They're just a reflection of the capital programme. And then we get to the 21-22 statement of accounts update. You will know that you signed off the accounts. I think it was back in October when myself and Grant Thornton, our auditors, brought them to you. We weren't able to finally sign them off because there was a statutory override needed on a certain part of the accounts, which was a national issue, not just a local issue. That statutory override was laid before Parliament and went through in December. I got a feeling it was something like the 24th and 25th of December. It was technically became law because when it was Danes, it had to sit there waiting to be converted. That's now allowed the final work to be done and some of the loose ends to be picked up. We now have a final audit finding report from Grant Thornton. There are recommendations here to reapprove the accounts. There are no changes to our usable reserves. There's no real change. This is all about technical accounting and some of the notes. But I'll hand over to David Bray from Grant Thornton, who is our audit manager, to give his latest audit finding report update.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. Good morning, David, and welcome. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Really nothing much to add to what Russell has said. We spoke to you on the 13th of October. At that stage, the audit was substantially complete. The work has now been finalised. So, subject to us getting signed documents through this afternoon, we expect to be in a position to sign off the accounts for 21-22 later today. We also need confirmation from your monitoring officer that there's no subsequent events we need to be aware of. But once again, that's a formality. So the audit findings report is set out, or the contents of it is set out in auditing standards. So it is by its very nature a long and complicated document. So I'm here today just to take any questions, Chair, but really don't propose to add anything to what we discussed in October. I think the key thing from our perspective is that the accounts were submitted to us ahead of the national timetable, and there were no adjustments as a result of the audit that impacted on the general fund balance. So that's a really positive message, and I think it's important to reflect on that. The accounts themselves are, by their very nature, complicated, and therefore it's almost inevitable that one or two amendments are identified in a document that probably runs to 80 or 100 pages. So that's it from me, Chair, but would be more than happy to take any questions either on the audit findings report or indeed on the wider audit, if that would be of interest to members.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Grottek.
Thank you, Chair. It's very pleasing that the external auditor believes that we have sound financial processes and that he's comfortable with the way the council is running its financial affairs. So as you comment, we have discussed this report in detail before, and I haven't actually got any other questions apart from thanking you very much for the work that you and your team have done on our behalf. At the same time as I'm speaking, perhaps I would just say thank you as well to Russell for the third quarter report. Again, his usual careful narrative doesn't give me very much to add with regard to that. We have got the challenges that we're all expecting, especially with inflation running at the rate that it is. We note the challenges around the airport, the waste charges that are rising, and the issues around agency staff use at Park House will mean that we will have to be very mindful of all these issues as we set the budget for next year. I would just say that it's pleasing at number 11 on page 119 to note the improvement in the payment of invoices, because especially local contractors will have real cash flow issues with the cost of living increase and the electricity charges and everything going up. I think it's especially necessary that we look very carefully at paying all of our contractors as soon as we can. So that is a very pleasing improvement. Thank you. I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you. And again, thank you to Russell. Sorry, I don't think I thanked you for your work on this report.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, please.
Yeah, they're just two quick observations. When we talk about the capital budget, we often talk about percentages of spend and things like that, which I find useful. I'm just wondering if when we're talking about some of the revenue overspends and underspends, we sort of quote big numbers, but we don't often put it into the context. I just wonder whether it would be useful going forward to have some sort of percentage figure, because when you read it, it does sound a colossal number. It doesn't give any context whether that's 2% over or 2,000% over, so I just wondered whether that could be considered. And the other thing was the agency staff. And I was at Integrated Care Board last week where there was a quote that Cornwall is the authority paying the most for agency staff. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it was something which was said. And I just wonder whether we need to look at the sort of bigger picture of what we're paying some of the care workers we've got. I think the landscape has changed significantly. They're sort of tied into our normal job evaluation scheme, and they've got the market forces supplement generally. But I think that's relatively old, and I think the pressures over the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years has seen national changes in. So I think we just might need to look at the package. If we could solve the issue locally, it would be desirable. But the recruitment and retention of staff to do some of these roles is getting harder and harder, not just locally but nationally. And we're having to compete against the whole country. Selling Scilly as a destination, I think, probably isn't good enough anymore. So I think we need to just unpick some of that on a local basis.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Russell, did you want to come back on any of that? Or?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I don't think I disagree with the councillor. I've spoken to both the director in that area and the chief executive, and I think it's something that we have to look at, not just in this area, but across the whole staff of the whole of the island at some point. Is what is our package? What is our plan? I think you need to bring into account not only the package to bring people here. What is the division between people that work on the islands and work off the islands? I think there's a whole piece of work there to modernise our offering going forward that helps address this issue. It will probably come at a cost. Financial position going forward will be tight. I will give members a briefing later, which isn't for public at the moment, on where we are going forward with our financial plans, we probably are entering a period where finances will be tight, but we will need to address it because the downside is agency staff cost more than their own.
Thank you. Councillor Sims, please.
Yeah, thank you for a very thorough report again, Russell. I just wanted it, in overspend, face economy and environment, and it does mention there has been the increase, the overspend is mainly due to the increase in disposing of waste. I think that it went up by 20% this year, which is quite a considerable hit. And the final bit of it is in that paragraph is that there being more domestic waste than forecast and less trade waste, which doesn't actually really make sense in the real world. So I don't want to open the debate now because we talk about it an awful lot, but again, this is something that needs to be looked at because in some respects it should be going the other way. We have a housing crisis because we have not enough houses for locals, yet domestic waste is going up.
Thank you, Russell.
Yeah, it is something that we have discussed previously. It is something that we are looking at in terms of when we set the budget for next year, and a piece of work that we are like to bake in terms of looking at that, looking to make sure that our trade waste is done correctly. We charge the full cost, and not only do we charge the full cost, but we also ensure that the right people pay. It is a piece of work we'll need to do. It will be part of the recommendations, I think, as long as members agree to that in February. There is a little bit of enforcement activity, I think, that we will need to introduce going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Yeah, just a quick point. I've mentioned it before, and sorry to bore you with it, Russell, but the water rates, it's now 3 years since we got rid of it, and we've still got this outstanding debt. I guess the question is, at what point do we just give up and write it off? That is a good point. It does feel like it's gone on forever. I mean, you've got to remember, for the best part of 18 months, 2 years, the reason we haven't been able to progress it is because first of all, when COVID came in, we weren't allowed to collect any debt at all. The government put a ban on any sort of enforcement. Once we got out of COVID, the ability to start some collection was reintroduced. Some of the court action was still further delayed. The courts then did open up eventually. The backlog is huge nationally to get items on through the small claims courts, which is where we'd be aiming for these. I don't think like to try and get a priority, trying to get into those places to get the debt collection is difficult. I think certainly I would not disagree with the councillor that sometime during this calendar year, i.e. 2023, I think we will need to take that view of how much more can we collect and how much are we spending collecting it. But the debt is getting older. The people we are chasing are moving around, moving on, off island, disappearing one way or the other. As we all know, people are in business. The older the debt is, the harder it is to collect, and we are getting there. But part of it is more like about 2 years of non-activity, almost right on the top of the 2020 transfer of the water service off our books. The timing couldn't have been worse. We've managed to bring it down from 80 to 40, so we're going in the right direction, but I don't think it will come down to zero. I think it can come down a little bit more to 40, but there will be a need to write some off during the next calendar year.
Thank you very much. Don't see any other hands up, so could I please have a proposer for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Sims, seconded Councillor Grottick. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. And I would like to take this opportunity to say from the Chair that whilst we are all starkly aware of the challenges we face ahead, it is very pleasing that our auditors, Grant Thornton, and our 151 officer are satisfied with our current situation as far as it can be, and which is very pleasing and very positive, where we could be in a far worse situation. So thank you both very much for your help and all your work on this. Thank you. Right, I'd like to move on now to item 13 on our agenda, which is our Fire and Rescue Service Community Risk Management Plan in the hands of our Director, Aisling. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for having us today. Just to introduce you, I've got Helen Turner here, who is the strategy lead for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, and as part of our service level agreement, she's going to be supporting the team to develop our Community Risk Management Plan, which I'm now going to abbreviate, if that's okay, to CRMP. This replaces the Integrated Risk Management Plan, which was a statutory requirement from 2018 onwards. As you're aware, the fire and rescue services nationally are coming under increasingly exacting inspection and scrutiny, as is appropriate given the level of risk they carry, and also, as you know, from some really kind of high-profile fires and incidences. So we have to do exactly the same as every other fire and rescue authority and produce for the next few years a community risk management plan which brings together all the views of local stakeholders, that's the community, the people we work with, particularly our workforce, and any findings that we've got from other sources, so that will be our inspection report, our COVID inspection report, and bring them all together and say this is what we plan to do over the next 4 years, and out of that falls annual action plans. This therefore gives you documentation by which you, as well as the community, can hold us to account about what we're going to do. One of the recommendations in our fire and rescue inspection, which I sent to you the other day, was about making very explicit in the CRMP as we move forward risk and resource. So if we identify this area of work as priority, that we clearly therefore assign the amount of money in the budget to it. So again, that gives you some really good ways of monitoring our progress. We are also going to look at a suite of key performance indicators falling out of this, which are meaningful to you and to our service. Because, you know, obviously we report the standard stuff, like number of incidences, number of, road traffic collisions, but thankfully, actually that is actually very kind of small aspects of the work we do here, and actually a lot of it is in the prevention and protection space. So we're going to try and devise some outcomes that we can measure, and then you can know that your service is effective. So for the purpose of this meeting, you have magically turned into the Fire and Rescue Authority because it's one and the same thing. So what we need you from this paper is that you feel happy with the approach that we're taking. We are going to do a formal equality impact assessment on this, but what we have tried to be mindful of in our approach is that we gather every voice we possibly can, including the quieter ones. We've spoken a lot to our crews already who've got really good insights about what works on their individual islands, and the team on St Agnes were very clear about what works. Open days don't. We rather knock on doors. St Martin's had a different thought. So I think making sure that the approach is flexible is really important. We sent through some papers already, and I know that members have already responded, which is good. We put deliberate typos in so everybody reads them, and I think Councillor Grottig picked up one where we said there were 5 stations on each island. We like to work Kev hard, but we've only got the one. So it's very good timing to be doing all this because obviously we've got the report from the last few years. We know where we are. It's in quite a good place, but we know where we need to improve. We've got the agreement to appoint a Chief Fire Officer, and there'll be an email update on that today about the successful candidates. And we're about to do our Community Risk Management Plan. So it's just a really good moment to bring everything together.